Tracks of My Years, written and read by Ken Bruce. I was born before there were charts. Just writing this makes it feel like a time before memory, when the world was barely formed, when Moses had only recently descended the mountain with the bad news about adultery, and Jimmy Young had just started school. But it wasn't so long ago. The first singles chart in this country hit the public in November 1952, a simple marketing ploy by the New Musical Express in an effort to put one over on its rivals. One Percy Dickens phoned round 20 record shops, pooled the results, and printed a top 12 in the NME. Top of the pops, although the phrase hadn't been invented yet, was Al Martino singing Here in My Heart. I was 21 months old when Al powered his way to number 1. To be born into a decade as grey as the 50s was a trial that succeeding generations do not fully appreciate. Britain was a nation exhausted in the 1950s. The war had drained the country of men, money, and resources. It had been a military victory, but an economic disaster. In 1951, rationing was still widespread. So when I made my entrance on the 2nd of February at the Orchard Park Nursing Home, Giffnock, Glasgow, it was to a family which, like every other in the land, was having to hand over coupons to obtain all the things we now take for granted: meat, eggs, cream, butter, cheese, margarine, and petrol. I was my parents' 4th child, 6 years younger than the last one. Isabel, the eldest, was 11, Scott, a couple of years younger, and Alistair, 2 years behind him. Music was always playing around the house. By the time I was 5, my sister and brothers were buying records and playing them on our parents' wind-up gramophone. Needless to say, they kept their precious records well away from the sticky-fingered wee bugger. I had a pretty carefree childhood. I was largely given a free rein by my parents. Izzy was a less present influence in my earliest years, although as adults we became much closer. The boys were, in the main, very good big brothers to me. Scott would carry me when I got tired, and Alistair kept the bullies off me. My mother's family had roots in Caithness, but were well planted in Edinburgh by the time she was born. My maternal grandfather was in the railway police, ending up as superintendent in Glasgow, and his children seemed to inherit the railway side of things. My mother, Williamina, was known as Minnie, and before her marriage to my dad, she worked for the railways in their Springburn offices. Her sister, my Aunt Isabel, became a staff welfare officer, and their brother, my Uncle Bertie, took the management route and eventually reached the dizzy heights of the British Railways Board. I pass his old office at Marylebone every day on my way to work. My father was part of a large family of 9 brothers and sisters who lived in the Mount Vernon area of Glasgow. Grandpa Bruce was a businessman who was long gone by the time I came along. Born around 1860, he'd worked as a commercial traveller, going all round Scotland by train and carter's wagon. When he married, he became a prolific breeder. Peter, my dad, was one of the younger of the flock, born in 1903. Unsurprisingly, I only knew his immediate siblings. Uncle Andy lived in Cheshire and had that strange hybrid accent that expat Scots develop, still obviously Scottish, but with the heavy R sound missing. Uncle Tommy was a typical Glasgow man, by which I mean he drank. Glasgow had a strangely ambivalent attitude towards alcohol. While the city boasted more alcoholics per head of population than anywhere else in the country, it also claimed more teetotalers than any other city. There was an odd civil instrument known as the veto poll, where an electoral ward could vote as to whether or not to allow alcohol sales in the area. Unsurprisingly, large parts of the city were without pubs or off licences. This led to some long treks before the rules were eventually relaxed. We were a solid middle-class family, for Glasgow, that is. Class divisions were much less clear in that city. It probably boiled down to whether or not you owned your own home. If you had a council house, you were working class. If you had your own, you were middle class. There was no upper class. Our life was comfortable and happy. We weren't rich, but we always had plenty of food and clothes. Although I never wore new clothes, except for school uniform, everything else was hand-me-downs. My dad's car was a standard Vanguard. We lived in a large, mid-terrace sandstone house in Giffnock on the outskirts of the city. Luxuries didn't seem to come into our lives, but nobody seemed interested in them. We weren't an acquisitive family, and I think it's fair to say that all 4 of us have gone through
Sample complete. Ready to continue?